Uh, Welcome to Lit Cafe. For those of you that have been to a few of these before, you probably know how these work. But for anybody that hasn't, my name is Trevor Freeman, and I'm the Public Programs Director here at the Western North Carolina Historical Association. Glad to be here tonight with you and bring you this latest installment in our series. Just a few housekeeping things. We do record these events. It's a live event, but it's recorded, and then it will be available within just a few days on our website. And we'll email everybody who registered a link to that. We'll also send you out a brief survey if you want to tell us about your experiences or any comments you may have. We will have our presentation tonight, and then afterwards we'll save a little time at the end for questions and answers. So feel free throughout tonight's event to chime in with any questions, any thoughts you have. We have at the bottom of your screen that Q&A button, and if you'll please use that, it helps us keep the questions in sequential order, so it's a little bit easier to address those at the end. But I'll get to the point here tonight. I'm glad to have with us Dale Neal, and that name may be familiar to some of you. Dale is a novelist. He's a teacher and also a veteran journalist living in Asheville. He says about a mile from the banks of the French Broad River. He's the author of Appalachian Book of the Dead, the subject of tonight's event, which, wouldn't you know, I left my copy at home tonight. This book that came out last year, it's a Southern Buddhist thriller. And it was a finalist for our Thomas Wolfe Memorial Literary Award. His previous novels are Cow Across America, which won the Novello Literary Award, and then also The Half-Life of Home, which I do actually have. His short stories and essays have appeared in Arts and Letters, the North Carolina Literary Review, Carolina Quarterly, and elsewhere. Dale earned a MFA in creative writing from Warren Wilson, right here in our backyard. As a reporter for the Asheville Citizen-Times, he traveled from the Upper Pawpaw in Madison County all the way to Karachi in Pakistan, covering culture, books, religion, business, science, and technology. He currently teaches fiction and nonfiction at Lenoir-Rhyne University, their Asheville Center for Graduate Studies. And without any further ado, I'll turn this over to you, Dale. Thank you for being here.
Trevor, thanks so much. Thanks so much. I'm delighted to be here. I can't see you all out there, but I know you're out there. I want to do just a nice shout out to the Western North Carolina Historical Association and all the fine work y'all do through the year and year round and for a number of years. And particularly, you know, your support of the Thomas Wolfe Memorial Literary Award. Again, I was deeply honored when y'all had me as a finalist for that award. But again, the work y'all do in keeping this region's lore and history, you know, in order for, you know, future generations. There's lots of people moving into this area who don't quite know everything there is here. And obviously we don't know everything that is here. So tonight I want to talk about not so much history, but the alternate histories I think that novels are able to provide. And particularly Appalachian Book of the Dead, which is my third novel, which I have a nice copy of here, you know, in case, you know, Trevor, I'm at the house, so I didn't leave mine here. So as Trevor said, you know, I was thinking about trying to write the course out of, all of my books are set in Western North Carolina. I'm a strong believer in a writer needs a sense of place as much as he needs characters. So I do come out of that sort of Southern school, Appalachian school. This landscape is so unlike any other, right? And it generates, I think, literature that fits these mountains. And so thinking along those lines, I'm always trying to figure out what I can add new to the region. What can I add new to the literature? I'm not interested in writing the same old, you know, novels that we've seen before. There's lots of great ones out there, and y'all have been party and privy to many of them, you know, all the way back to John Ely and the Landbreakers and his series of novels set around Asheville and the development of Asheville. Robert Morgan, Fred Chappell, you know, the list goes on, of course, up into our generation with, you know, Chuck Frazier, and Ron Rash, of course. And there's so many other excellent writers out there who call this territory home. So, but I want to put a different spin on that. I think Flannery O'Connor called, the South in particular, Christ haunted, which fit her stories very well, and her sort of what she wanted to get at in her stories. I've come to believe that, the South is very much, haunted by karma. Karma is as native to the South as kudzu. And I wanted to write a book about karma and reincarnation and ghosts and revenge and addiction. As Trevor was saying, this is my sort of Southern Buddhist thriller. So the book begins with a killer disappearing into the woods around a fictional community called Yonah, North Carolina. So let me go ahead and kick us off with the very first page. I'll read that. I'll talk a little bit more about it. We'll do a few more readings. Like Trevor was saying, I do want to sort of wrap up my presentation about half an hour in, and because I really like to have a conversation with you and see what's on your mind about what we can talk about, specifically about this book, other books, anything that's on your mind, Western North Carolina literature, history. Again, I'm a novelist. If I don't know the answer, maybe I'll make up something for you. But let's begin with Appalachian Book of the Dead at the start. With his mind so neatly made up, Richard Peabody never saw them coming. Through the miasma of overpriced petroleum wafting from the gas tank of his dusty Seville, he never even considered in his biblically allotted 70 years the prospect of such pure meanness crossing his path a quarter mile from the brick rancher he'd shared with his first and only wife, where last Easter they'd burned their 30-year mortgage in the hearth. Paying no mind, pumping his premium at the gas and go out Highway 9, Peabody, a retired CPA, Braves fan, and Presbyterian vestryman, sniffed for his favorite vice from the boiled peanut stand at the parking lot's crumbled edge. Steam from the cast iron kettle rose against the curtain of kudzu that choked the scrub woods. The summer's hatch of insects screamed in the imprisoned shade. Too late, he heard, "Mister, can I ask you something?" What? Peabody could smell him before he saw him, the lanky youth in the orange jumpsuit reeking of work crew sweat. No, he didn't think so. No good came from talking to strangers, young ones at that, who always asked Peabody to buy them beer. He never saw the second one, only felt the blow from behind, the hose snatched from the tank and wound tight about his windpipe, the gas pumping against his pulse. Their swift hands dug through his suspended trousers for his keys, loose change, money clips, cell phone. He drifted into darkness, then came to with a splash of high-test petroleum on his face. "Tell me, mister, you smoke?" He couldn't see a face, only the back of a hand painstakingly tattooed to depict a naked woman struggling in a demon's claw. The inked hand loomed larger, holding a plastic butane lighter, and he heard the small scraping of the wheel before the world flashed white. At a station too cheap for security cameras, the sole witness was the black man in the peanut shack, half blind with glaucoma, who saw the fatal flash, a fire juggling arms and legs as the Seville fishtailed from the parking lot where what little was left of Richard Peabody lay incinerated. So, welcome to Yonah. As you can see, there's some bad things going on in those first opening pages there. There's a pair of killers who sort of leave not just Richard Peabody in their wake, but some others as well, before they disappear into the woods. Now, one of them is caught within a few days with this massive manhunt, but the other disappears and is never found. Angel Jones, Angel Garcia Jones. So this is sort of the setup for the book, and then it really wanted to shift. Um, it starts talking about the people who live in Yona, who have to live with this fear of this, killer who may or may not still be out there in the woods. Several months have passed by after the manhunt. So the action shifts to these residents in this small rural community. There's Cal and Joy McAllister, and they've moved to Yona from Chicago. And Cal is a former commodities trader. He's a self-sober alcoholic who hates 12-step recovery programs. So he's been sort of invented his own method. He relies on the Stoic meditations of Marcus Aurelius. He reads Marcus Aurelius daily to help him and stay sober, and also to grieve the death of his own son, Galen, who died of a drug overdose back in Chicago. Now, Joy is his third wife. She's wanting to move him away from Chicago, start over, help him get past this grief, past this pain that he has. But Joy has her own sort of agenda as well. She'd like to be a potter. Her ambition is to join the Southern Handicraft, Highland Craft Guild someday. So she's out there trying to make Appalachian face jugs and learn how to do that. And she's enlisted the aid of a neighbor, Doyle Smathers, to help her build a kiln for her pottery. Doyle is the only real local in the novel as such, which strikes me as more realistic about our own mountains now. Everybody's moved here. It's very hard to find the real natives. They're slowly dying out. So Doyle used to run, he's the caretaker for an old summer camp for girls that was next door to, Cal and Joy's new property. And the camp has since closed up. It also served as the headquarters for the manhunt, which took place, about several months before. He does have someone who's visiting him, though. This is Ainsley Morse. She's the granddaughter of the camp owner. And Ainsley used to be a camper at Camp Beetree years before it closed. And she wants to come back. She's had a rough time out west. She's sort of taking refuge in a yurt on the property. I wanted to have a yurt because all the cabins have sort of rotted away, and she's sort of a California type. So she's there staying up on the mountain by herself in this brand new yurt that Doyle had to have shipped in from California, erect on the property. Now, Ainsley is detoxing from her own grief, much like Cal is, her own addiction as well. She has a boyfriend that, died on her, again, of a drug overdose out west. Again, Appalachia, unfortunately, is home to so many addictions these days, not just Appalachia, but all across America. There's opiate addictions that have been going on for forever and a day. So this novel is very much concerned about, people grieving these old ghosts, never mind, the killer who may be in the woods, that threat out there. So Ainsley is a practicing Buddhist. So while she's, detoxing herself and grieving, she's reading daily from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's an ancient scripture that it explains how the recently departed navigate this series of events, of demons and delusions on their way to their next rebirth. You read the Tibetan Book of the Dead out loud and into the woods around Yona, and there's no telling who may or may not be listening, like Angel, perhaps, the escaped killer. So after 7 years sober, Cal is tempted to try the local moonshine. So he's enlisted Doyle to maybe, help him with that thing, that little quest. And Joy, of course, is relying on Doyle to, build her a kiln for her pottery. And of course, a storm blows up and the yurt is somewhat damaged. Ainsley has to take shelter with the McAllisters. There's all sorts of bad decisions that ensue from there. So where did I come up with a novel like this? A mismatch of it seems like. Years ago, when I was a journalist, with the Asheville Citizen Times, way back in the 80s, I did cover a manhunt that did stay with me. It was for a pair of killers, escapees, who did kill a state trooper and sort of disappeared into a place around Madison County, around Spring Creek for a number of days. Um, what struck me was not so much, that, standard sort of manhunt, but the idea of the fear. The image that stuck with me was I saw this school bus coming down the grade there around these curves and everything, and letting out these school children, from their day into this mass of armed men and cops and search dogs and helicopters and all that. The people there had to live every day with, are these killers out there, and how that would affect them. But that image of a school bus and those innocent children stepping off into a scene like that. I'd also covered religion for a number of years at the newspaper, and of course there are Buddhists up here. There is everything up in Western North Carolina, which is one of the reasons I love this place so much. Everybody wants to come here, so everybody has like a summer camp here, so whether you're a Baptist, Methodist, name your denomination, they're here, there's Jewish day camps, there's every kind of denomination wants to send their kids up here to the mountains, right? And so the Buddhists are up here as well. The Southern Dharma Retreat Center, they have classes and retreats over there, and I have taken some over there, and I did see a yurt there, which did sort of stick with me, a yurt set off and up on the mountains. But I did come across the Tibetans in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So the imagery in the Tibetan Book of the Dead can be extraordinarily graphic. I mean, they're great. They put Dante to shame as far as the Inferno. I mean, the Buddhists have numbers of hells that you can go through, and these 49 days on this road map, in the Bardo, this in-between place between death and reincarnation. So there's about 6 different realms that can be reincarnated into, evidently. And one of those, beyond the human and the demons and the animals and that sort of thing, is a realm called hungry ghosts. And that fascinated me, hungry ghosts. There are these beings that are often depicted as with these pencil-thin necks and these huge bellies. I mean, their neck is so small, they can't get down enough, to feed their belly. So there's this constant craving. They can't get enough. Which is a very, unsettling image, right? And of course, people have drawn some conclusions from that. Gabor Mate, the Canadian psychoanalyst and writer, has seen that metaphor, connecting addicts and alcoholics and hungry ghosts. So for me, it takes at least 2 opposing ideas to write a book. Fiction makes fiction. Monsters and murder, addiction and reincarnation become the opposites in what I'm calling that Southern Buddhist thriller. I think Cormac McCarthy meets the Dalai Lama. So I wanted to, set off a killer in the woods, this threat on the outside, but also explore the internal threats that these characters must face as well. All of them are wrestling with their inner demons, their deepest fears and grief, while they're also scared of this potential monster, what they think of, a man to think of as a monster out in the woods. You give flesh to your fears, you give to your ghosts their anxious lives long after they're faded in memories. So, and I'd like to say I invented the whole title Appalachian Book of the Dead. Actually, I did borrow it from a series of poems by Charles Wright. He's the former US poet laureate. And he did write, a series of poems that he called Appalachian Book of the Dead. Here's a few lines for one of them. And where's October's golden and red? Where is its puff of white smoke? Another page torn off the Appalachian Book of the Dead. The soul that desires to return home desires its own destruction. We know which never stopped anyone. So let me take a little sip of my tea here to warm my voice. Thank you so much. What I'd like to do is read another section here that sort of gives you a flavor of the rest of the novel. It's not all killers and mayhem early on. There's only so much of that even I would have stomach to write, or I think readers would do. But what I want to do is have that energy generated very quickly in the beginning that sort of reverberates through the novel that these other characters are feeling. I want to read a section where we first meet Ainsley Morse, really, she's in her late 20s again, and very much into Buddhism and New Age sort of thinking, and talk about, her sort of feelings about, where she's at and her own Buddhist grieving right now. Ainsley Morse drifted down the overgrown trail, the billows of her peasant dress hemmed with beggar lice from the plants she passed. She carried the half-eaten plate of Jell-O with her. She hadn't wanted to hurt the neighbor lady's feelings, but green gelatin, everybody has to bring you green gelatin in the mountains, right? As much as she was force-fed it as a camper, was not her favorite. Yet she didn't want it to go to waste. She followed the trail to the bend where a slab of mossy granite stood like a table set for elves. There she made her offering, the gelatin, grains of brown rice from the pilaf cooked last night on the propane stove, a few ferns plucked to pretty the plate. If not the ghosts who spied from behind the tree trunks, she was certain some creature, an ant or a bird, or something four-legged and furry would come for her offering. Only then could she return the plate to the nice lady who had walked all the way up the road with the gift. Karma dictated that she pass on the good vibes and sustenance into the world of which we are one. She prayed, "Here, ghost, don't go hungry. Now please leave me alone." She had the sense that Bernie's her boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, late boyfriend. She had the sense that Bernie had followed her here, 2,000 miles across the desert, maybe even as a stowaway on the United flight, a tattered spirit riding the wing, since he could slip through the TSA screenings undetected. She could feel him pressing his warm body against hers when she stood spread eagle. In that X-ray, could the guard see the couple they once were? Bernie had introduced her to everything. They had been joined at the hip, or at least slept that way for the past 4 years. It was like she could melt into him and come out the other side. They wanted to consume each other. And so they had all these little nicks and scrapes and welts on their bodies, their little love bites. They could sink their teeth into each other, a carnivorous love. And in those years, that short time they were together, Bernie was always shopping for the guru who would guide them on the correct path, though he soon bucked any ashram or commune or sangha when they showed up and settled. "Damn charlatan," Bernie would mutter in no time, and soon they would be packing up the van or the SUV or whatever secondhand vehicle they had to hit the road again. Ainsley had liked the places and the people that they met, and she learned a lot in their spiritual quest. They all seemed to fit together: Buddhist, Hindu, Vedic, Taoist, Church of Peyote, Pentecostal. They rounded the four corners, trampolined out to Chicago, to California on occasion, took in the latest guru, shaman, healer, yogi, Rinpoche, or Roshi. They had ingested it all as far as mind-altering botanicals, marijuana, hashish, mushrooms, and ultimately peyote, and a teepee where she could hear the old ones howling outside in the desert wind, her blood beating louder than the rawhide drum, the sweat lodge melting away with a smudge of sagebrush whipping her back, her mind melting away. But even the Paiute shaman wouldn't let Bernie or Ainsley come back for another trip until the moon was full. "You can't rush these things, little bro," the old Indian had said. At last they landed at a Tibetan Buddhist center, sitting in knee-breaking full lotus positions in a small air-conditioned room. The altar stacked with fruits, papayas, brass butter lamps, ritual implements, richly embroidered runners, and wild icons of tantric deities and demons, while the desert sun beat down on the adobe walls, the metal roof, the prickly pear cactus, and the red rock outside. By day, John Woo, wore polyester sweaters and pushed his heavy horn-rimmed glasses on his nose, drilling his adult students on physics at the community college. By night, he slipped into a saffron robe and a new name, Venerable Lobsang Tulki, drilling another set of disciples on the Dharma. He was the director of the Nectar Monastery's Esoteric Buddhist Center, in a lineage of Chinese Tibetan practitioners, a small school that considered the Dalai Lama and his ilk as reincarnated lightweights. Most of these Dharma talks went right over Ainsley's head, while Bernie kept nodding. John Woo talked about reincarnation, how we cycle endlessly along the wheel of birth and death, confused and deluded unless we can see how to get off the merry-go-round. There are 6 realms you could be born into, Wu explained. Gods, titans, humans, animals, demons, hungry ghosts. Did you say ghosts? Ainsley interrupted. Hungry ghosts, preta in the Sanskrit. They are often depicted with these terribly huge bellies and these tiny mouths and thin throats. They are always hungry. They can never get enough to eat. More, but never enough. Is that a metaphor, or do you really believe that hungry ghosts are real? Bernie badgered the poor teacher. Are we for real? The Venerable laughed. He slid his glasses back up his broad nose. We are both real and not real. One way to look at it is that we pass through these bardos ourselves every day before we physically die. Who among us hasn't been blue as a human or gone all the way into hell, lashing ourselves with our own fears disguised as demons? We are light as gods some days, powerful titans at some hours, and some days we cower like whipped animals. How often are we really human in that one realm where we can jump off into enlightenment that is already there for us? And don't you think you meet hungry ghosts every day? These people who are addicted to drugs, to drink, to power, they are never satisfied. They never get enough. They are tortured beings who deserve our compassion. That's why most Buddhists offer ritual food and compassion. They could possibly eat nourishment. Ainsley felt a drop in the pit of her stomach. Yes, I understand. She looked at Bernie, his yellow skin. He always needed the next fix. Yes, she had seen a hungry ghost before. So I'll stop right there with that. So the idea of hungry ghosts, does sort of animate this book, these different realms psychologically that these characters sort of pass through. And there are hints of reincarnation back there, hallucinations. There's some strange stuff that you might have noticed if you picked it up. But again, there's a sort of undercurrent of what happened to Angel Jones and what journey he's on. So I was interested in writing a book that, does sort of move away from that Judeo-Christian sort of progress, this arc where we go up, ever upward, and it's somewhat predictable. I wanted to sort of write a book in the shape of a circle, a mandala, with all that vivid imagery there. So there was a lot to try and feed in there, but it was fun. It was fun. And that's what I look for when I'm writing. How do I entertain myself and hopefully a reader along the way, while staying true to this region? So I've been talking for quite some time here, 6:29. So I'm going to leave it right there for now. Some of you may have seen the book and read it. Might have some questions about it. Hope I didn't spoil any spoilers along the way, but if there's comments or questions, I'd love to have a conversation with you now. Thank you so much for listening and being here.
All right, well, thank you, Dale. And thank you everybody that's chimed in so far. I think we've got 5 questions in the chat so far. So I think the first question was, what community near Asheville was Yona based on?
That's always sort of a made up sort of community. There is no Yona around. I actually sort of checked around in the North Carolina, gazetteer for this. I wanted to have a fictional place. So it is sort of, maybe an hour's drive somewhere around Asheville. All of my books are set somewhere around Asheville in fictional communities. So, and I think this is sometimes the hard thing to explain to folks is that, I think many novelists do work out of, their own minds, their own imagination. There is some overlay with real life, and when you think of Thomas Wolfe and his Altamont and Asheville, match up pretty well. But a lot of writers, move things around. So there is not, Yona is not like a, stand-in for Madison County. It's not a stand-in for Marshall or anything. But I did like the name, which, and of course in Cherokee means bear. So there's a sort of animalistic sense to it. And I didn't mention, one of the characters, one of my favorite characters in the novel as well, is there's a coyote that sort of roams through the book as well, who may or may not be picking off poor Joy's, barn cats. So, but it does sort of tie into, again, that realm, that animal realm, and the coyote senses some things out in the woods that wasn't there, just a few weeks before. So again, I'm always trying to find a place that's true to the region, but again, not just a stand-in or doppelganger, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Excellent question, though.
All right. Yeah, I kind of had that on my list as well. I figured somebody might ask that. You mentioned in the book, fake moonshine. Somebody wanted to know if you could elaborate on that.
I'm always aware that, there's always these sort of stereotypes that it is so easy for our literature to fall into, in place with. And there's so many, books, some are better written than others, but there are these stereotypes that, particularly Appalachian noir, it's, you have meth heads out there, or, we always have snake handlers and moonshine in this area, which is, there is obviously a grain of truth to this, though the snake handlers were very much over on the other side of the state line in Tennessee, and that was a recent phenomenon, in the 19th century. They've not been around forever and a day. Moonshine, of course, liquor making has been around for much longer than that. But I didn't want to fall into the usual sort of, stereotypes about moonshine. But of course, anyone who moves here wants to know about it. So Cal, of course, is getting thirsty after being sober so long, saying, maybe I can try some of this. So he asked Doyle, his next door neighbor. So, and I think Doyle, if he's quite honest with himself, he has no idea how to make moonshine. He had some uncles who drank too much and made bad stuff. I always like those, remember those church fans, or you have to be around long enough, but there used to be these paper church fans, where you wave yourself, during the hot Sunday sermons before air conditioning. And one of my favorites I ever saw, years and years ago, was a warning against drinking bad moonshine. Those guys who used to run it through the radiators and the stuff that would blind you and poison you and that sort of thing. So, so I wanted to have Doyle not try and go so far as that. The upshot is that when Cal keeps sort of badgering him about he's the native, he should know this stuff. On the sly, what Doyle does is he goes down to Asheville to the ABC store where he buys the legally made moonshine off the shelf, carts it back home, uncorks the bottle, untwists the bottle, pours it into mason jars, and then passes it off to Cal and other folks as the real thing. So, Doyle is no dummy, but, he doesn't know everything about this kind of lore. So that was always kind of the fun thing about, playing with novels, is playing against stereotype, playing against reader expectation and that sort of thing. So along those same sort of lines, I did have, what's a Southern Buddhist thriller, these days without zombies. So I don't have any actual zombies in the book, but, Doyle was taking part. There was a movie that was shot at the former summer camp, a cheap, low budget sort of thing, a zombie sort of apocalypse movie. And Doyle did have a bit part in that movie fighting off zombies. It all went straight to DVD. So this book, of course, is set, earlier in the century before we have, Netflix and streaming services. This is more in the realm of flip phones and, remember, Blockbuster Video, that sort of thing. So again, a lot of it is playing with, what's actually happening in the culture as we go along, rather than these old-timey things on the porch, or, our nostalgia for what we think, the South and the Appalachian Mountains used to be like, and the people. So playing against those kind of expectations and playing more reality into the book is fun. It's fun. So.
Someone asked about names specifically. They said, what informed your decision to give their killer a Latinx name? She said the actual crime that inspired, I believe, the backstory of Angel was done by a white man.
Yeah, yeah. We were sort of playing with that. Angel he's half Hispanic or whatever, so I didn't want to go too far in that direction. But I think part of it's playing up Cal's sort of fears about some of these people. I didn't want to try and get too sensitive about that. Angel is not Hispanic by any means. He's more a product of the inner city. He just happens to have a sort of Latin name, but he speaks no Spanish or anything along those lines, really. So not trying to make any offensive sort of things along those lines. But what I did want to do was have someone who does make terrible mistakes and does kill people or whatever. But I think the book does explore his own background, and he is not a monster by any means. There is his own sort of progression through the book as well. So yeah, it's always sort of challenging to write, in some of these areas these days. You don't want to out and out offend readers or whatever, but you do want to explore what's in the human heart of everyone.
Yeah. I kind of had a question along with that. Some of the other names and last names, maybe names of people from the area. I wondered if you could speak a little bit about, using those kind of real local last names versus trying to come up with something that may not sound authentic.
Well, I think there's certain names that get associated with the area in the same way that certain peaks have certain names or whatever. So we have Smathers is a common sort of name in the area. But again, most of the people who populate this book are newcomers who are moving into the area. So a lot of it is just trying to find a name that sounds real for more than one thing. Because I think I like it when novels overlay real life as well. Novels are not real life by any means. They're not just rehashing history or whatever. I think good novels are a product of the writer's imagination. But it does bring in real things that we recognize. Whether it's nowadays Family Dollar stores out on the highway instead of general stores. How everyone goes around with cell phones, and I like it in Yona where the signal is still bad. So cell phones don't quite work as well out there. So this is a book very much set in the early 21st century. And not, in the 19th century, but, the land is still there, right? So again, finding those names that fit that region, fit that landscape is important to me.
Okay, great. Kind of your own personal connection to the book and to the story. Somebody wanted to know what brought you to Buddhism, if you want to talk about
that. I guess it's just an interesting sort of philosophy more than anything. Meditation, of course, is becoming very common in our culture, this idea of mindfulness and such. I'm by no means a Tibetan Buddhist. I mean, this gets, some of the imagery there gets very strange to my way of thinking. But I was struck by the imagery itself and how much that sparked the imagination. But again, I think too, what Buddhism does bring to it is this real idea of different realms, and particularly that whole idea of ghost stories, particularly hungry ghosts, and how we deal with our own fears. what the Tibetans do suggest is that, all these monsters in our minds, whether they are the Angel Jones or they are these, addictions or these, headless demons that appear in our dreams or whatever, they are all manifestations of our own mental processes. And in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that's what they're very much saying is don't pay attention to that. That's just a projection. That's you projecting your fears onto something else. And so what they're saying, of course, is if you face your fears, if you face your demons, you find that they are you, and there is some sort of transformation that can happen. So we don't have this sort of, here's the bad stuff over here, here's the good stuff over here, but it does sort of keep sort of circulating and changing. Um, which fits in with sort of, I think, the feeling of this landscape too, these mountains and these rivers continually flowing into each other. um, so I like the feel of it, in a strange sense, that if you pay attention out in the world, you see these interconnections, that we are all connected, and we can't just sort of say, here's the bad over here, I don't want to go there. I want to put those people over there. Um, or even that idea of addiction, why we keep going back to this thing that's killing us over and over and these griefs and fears that we have. So for me, it was a powerful way of learning, providing a framework to write a book. Um, and of course, I think meditation has been useful for me, in my own practice. So, um, what I've gotten to understand, there is no enlightenment where you get everything and you become this sort of floating thing that goes off to nirvana, but it does provide this method where you go through each day. And I'm very much in that more Zen school where it's chop wood and carry water, and you learn to appreciate your life as it comes up day by day by day. And so for that, I find that extraordinarily attractive. So that's a long-winded sort of roundabout way, but I should sort of say that I started out as a independent Baptist, raised as one. So I've sort of come all these sort of full circles. I do like to think, when I was covering religion, that all religions they are very different, and there are doctrinal and dogmatic conflicts certainly between them, but I think underlying them there is this mystical streak that does connect them, and I think people, as the Dalai Lama are saying, it says is everybody wants to be happy. What's the spiritual path that you take to get there is up to you. So, all right.
Thanks for sharing that. I wanted to ask some of the lore that crosses into your writing. Um, I've seen it crossed over in some places, like in the Half-Life, where you reference the story of the girl bitten by the rattlesnake.
Yeah.
Did that come from anywhere, or is that lore that is, something that you've heard before?
I've heard that before. I think that was, you go back to the original question, I think, where, is Yona based on anywhere in particular? I do have to say that, all of my imaginary landscape begins with my grandparents' farm, that I visited when I was a kid, of course, for years and years. And that was in Watauga County, on the other side of Boone, a place called Beaver Dam. Now, if you're looking again in the North Carolina Gazette, there are bunches of beaver dams, communities in this region. So I like that name because it is sort of, in the novels, it can sort of vary there. But I very much, fell in love with these mountains by coming up here, summer after summer, season after season, visiting my grandparents' farm. It was, my grandfather was a tobacco farmer. He was very much old school, never had a tractor, used a horse and plow, that sort of thing, hung the tobacco in the barn. Fortunately, I never had to pick tobacco, so I didn't have to go into that, the weeds with that or whatever. That's hard work. That's extraordinarily hard work. But I did hear so many tales and stories and such from my grandparents and my mother growing up in that community. And I did hear a story about a little girl who was, gathering eggs or whatever in the hen house or whatever. and was bitten by a rattlesnake, and for whatever reason covered it up or didn't automatically tell her parents, and I think did pass from that snake bite. Which of course, if you're a budding novelist, that's going to be in the back of your head. So that's got to go in somewhere. So and actually, it shows up in a lot of the books I write. It does keep coming up, that haunting image.
There was one question about what are you working on now, and can you tell us what's in the works?
That's in the works. So I'm always working on something, and they are. I am married to this region, so they are all set here. It would be very hard for me to say set a novel in Paris or something, or any place else I've been, because that landscape. Yeah, I love Paris, love to go back or whatever. But again, the landscape still has to speak to me, so I can speak to these characters and have a place for them to inhabit. So I'm working on a new novel, which is tentatively called The Kings of Coetzee County. Again, Coetzee is a fictional county, a fictional region here, very much like Yona. And it's about stolen ballot boxes and vote buying and corrupt sheriffs and a new sheriff's campaign. And again, I kind of circulate back to there's always a killer that comes back to town or something. We do have sort of our share of these strange sort of murder mysteries sometimes in the mountains. But this one I think too revolves more about the women in this particular community and their love of ballad singing. There's lots of ballads, of course, up in Madison County. Coetzee is not Madison County, but again, sort of a takeoff. So that's where I'm at. I'm sort of wrestling with that right now. It's about 250 pages in, so got some more work with it to go. But I like where it's headed. This idea of murder ballads in particular. How sad they are, and how gruesome too, right? Where you have lovers, beating each other and throwing the poor girl into the river, or silver daggers being stuck into the poor guy's heart, and he gets thrown into the well, or the king coming home to find he's been cuckolded in his own bed, so he chops off his wife's head and kicks that against the wall, or what. And these are old Scottish sort of ballads, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, that still very much speak to us today, and I think speak to what we're still feeling in our common culture. So having fun. I'm having fun. Let's put it that way.
I've got let's see, just a few more questions here for you, and I'll wrap things up. Somebody asked if there were any other names in the book or in the writings that reflect ethnic identities, or is there anybody besides Angel?
No, but I think in the new book there is more when we start getting into the Black experience, because I think, of course, for particularly in our culture today, we understand that so many of these stories that we're telling are buried history, and for so long in Appalachian history, we were always sort of served up this notion there were no Black people here, there were no minorities here. It was all these white people who spoke this English, Elizabethan sort of dialect. And that's not necessarily, of course, true. So again, trying to expand that, blanket out a little bit further, working against these old stereotypes that we have of the region. This is what I always liked about Asheville and this area, that, we've always been a tourist town. One of the things I like about, and I do actually have, Cal and Joy and Ainsley make a road trip. I love road trips in a novel. They make a road trip to Asheville to the drum circle on a Friday night for, Cal to sort of fume around, but, Ainsley and Joy very much, enjoy themselves. But again, how many newcomers we have coming to this area? But we've always had this. We've always had this. Going back to the 20s, that boom town during Wolfe's time, he grows up in a boarding house where they're taking in people from all over the South each summer who come up here for the air, for the, relaxation, for TB sort of treatments and such. But even further back, how much, the railroad punched through the mountains, with John Ely's and the road builders. And all of a sudden, Asheville, used to be Morristown. It gets renamed. It doubles in population almost overnight, So Asheville has always been this boom bust kind of thing, attracting new people, attracting tourists, attracting new ideas, the Vanderbilts. I came up here in the 80s, early 80s myself, so I've always loved, the New Age sort of people came here as well, and the hippie homesteaders back in the 70s. And I always loved that, some people used to say that there was a crystal that was in Mount Mitchell or Mount Pisgah, right? Now I understand we have vortexes, perhaps at, Vance Monument and out in Swannanoa, who are bringing, people here. I can't tell you how many times when I was a journalist, I met people and they said, I just moved to Asheville, didn't have a job or anything. I felt called here. I've not ever met too many people who felt called to Fayetteville, North Carolina, or, Bismarck, North Dakota necessarily. I'm sure they're fine towns in themselves, but there is something special about this landscape, about the energies and vibes that we get here. That's interesting. That's interesting.
All right. I'll ask one quick last question, and you may be familiar or not. I haven't read it myself, but somebody's asked, as a book reviewer, what is your response to Lincoln in the Bardo?
Lincoln in the Bardo. Okay, Lincoln in the Bardo, the George Sanders book. I like that book a lot. I'll have to admit, George Sanders, most folks know that, extraordinarily noted short story writer, extraordinarily proficient, expert writer with those short stories, has a very quirky, distinctive voice. I've never been, sometimes that voice kind of eludes me, but I was amazed to see what he was able to do in a longer form like the novel. Again, it's a very strangely built novel, sort of constructed out of these sort of, some of it's real quotes and some of it's, made up quotes or whatever. But it does, again, revolve around the idea of Abraham Lincoln mourning his son Todd, who's been buried in the mausoleum, in a graveyard not far from the White House. So you have Lincoln going down to visit his dead son, and there are all these sort of visits, these spirits around him and such. So again, Sanders is a Buddhist as well, and I think he again likes that imaginative sort of realm that this Buddhism sort of gives him to even the dead have lives. So often in our fiction we say, oh, you're dead, that's it. They're sort of off the scene or something, right? But the dead keep on living in a strange way, and that these stories can keep circulating. So it takes a while for the Lincoln and the Bardo, for all these ghosts and these spirits to sort of meet, get through their bardos, get through their sort of in between places. But I like that book a lot. That was a lot of fun.
All right. Well, thank you. Dell, do you want to say a quick word about where to find your books?
Okay.
Find what you're working on?
Yes. Do frequent your local bookstores. City Lights out in Silva, Malaprops downtown. They'll be glad to sell you one of my books. Or if they don't have one right away, they will get one for you. You can always go back to my website, www.dalenealbooks.com. You can see some links there. I've also got some different kind of musings on, backpacking and writers I've been reading and various things that come to mind, some essays and such. But there's some nice links to, the background to the books and as well there. And of course, you can always follow me on Facebook and Instagram and all those other good places out there. So do keep in touch. I do like hearing from readers.
Well, thank you so much, Dale, for being here tonight. Thank you for sharing your work. Glad we had a lot of really good questions from the audience. So thank you all for participating and enjoying this tonight.